Hello guys, how's it going? I'm Don Corleone, and today we're going to talk about pre-flop exploits with a focus on 3-betting and 4-betting. But I want to preface that we're going to talk about much deeper topics. You might have your head blown by some of the things we're going to talk about. So I think it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty fundamental and deep, the things we're going to talk about. So yeah, make sure to stick to. Well, I think by the middle you'll already see what I'm referring to. So what are we going to learn? Why pre-flop is the most important street. Okay, this might come as a shock to some people, but it just is. Okay, it just is. Next slide, we're going to talk about it. The main incentives that drive EV and win rate. So there's a lot of things you could be thinking about that would drive your decisions one way or the other with each hand. Like, I don't know, did your opponent lose the last hand and now he's going to 3-bet a little bit wider, right? There's a lot of factors, but obviously there's going to be 2 or 3 factors that are most affecting the EV of your hands. And those are the ones that you need to be more actively thinking about. So we're going to go over those. We're going to talk about some common leaks at lower stakes and how to exploit them. That's fairly self-explanatory. And then we're going to talk about more complex dynamics and exploits. And this is what I'm referring to when I say we're going to go a little bit deeper. There's going to be some exploits that might surprise you, or that you maybe realize that you weren't thinking about poker in that way. So why is pre-flop the most important street? Well, pre-flop is the street where, at least online, right, specifically for online, you have the most information on your population and your opponents, your specific opponents, right? Live, it's harder to aggregate data, so maybe this is like not as true. But online, definitely, how your opponents play pre-flop as a whole and individually is one of the things that you can gather data fastest, right? And the same for your own strategy, right? Your own strategy is face up. Nowadays, with hand to node, people can look at your frequencies. People can look at even your ranges, right? Of course, samples are an issue, but pre-flop is the street where sample is the least issue. Right? It's still an issue, but it's the least issue of all of the streets. Most post-flop exploits are just pre-flop exploits. Okay? There are a lot of exploits that you are doing right now that are just plainly not working. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say this is a common thing that maybe I'll get questions about. Maybe a player is playing lower stakes and they are they think that their population overfalls to C-bets on flop. Right? Oh, my population overfalls to C-bets on flop. Should I range bet? Right? What I'm doing is I'm range betting. I'm betting all my air on flop because they are overfolding. Well, I'm sad to say that you're actually not exploiting anything there. Right? It might come as a surprise, but you're actually not really exploiting anything. You're winning because that player is overfolding and he's making minus EV plays and he's making mistakes. But the fact that you're deciding to bet your air on flop is actually not gaining anything. Right? You could check the flop and bet the turn. You could check the flop, check the turn, bet the river. All of those lines against that player would overperform. Right? So the fact that he's overfolding the flop and you're range betting is not actually doing anything. And this is why I say that most post-flop exploits are just pre-flop exploits. Right? Maybe there's something you need to do there that is not on that node. Maybe if a player is overfolding to c-bet, the only thing you can do is to open wider, for example. Once you're on the flop, there's no way for you to come up with more air than you already have in your range. And most pre-flop exploits are post-flop exploits. Right? We're going to also talk about that, how you might have an idea about how to adjust your range pre-flop, but if you don't follow through correctly later, if you don't know why you are playing a tighter range or a wider range, if you don't know those things, then you are likely to have your exploit, let's say, fizzle midway, right? Like you have a good like your plane is flying, right? You manage to start flying with your plane, but you need to still land the plane. Maybe you're not doing it properly. Playing hands perfectly is impossible, but setting up favorable scenarios is feasible. So what do I mean by this? I mean, as humans, it doesn't matter how good you get. It doesn't matter how close to an elite player you become. Playing hands perfectly, knowing how your opponent plays everywhere exactly, is not possible. But setting up favorable scenarios that make it easy to play against that player is possible, right? Maybe there's certain hands that perform better against a certain player, right? That are easier to play against that player because of certain tendencies that he has, right? Even if you don't play them perfectly, you can favor easier and more efficient decisions by playing preflop correctly. So we're going to start with a quiz. Big blind facing UTG RFI. So UTG is opening and we are on the big blind. What happens if UTG 4-bets queens plus ace king suited pure, right? Their whole strategy is locked. They open the same range, right? They're forced to open a normal UTG range. They're forced to call the same hands. Like the only thing that changes is that they are 4-betting pure with queens, kings, aces, and ace king suited. And the rest is the same. They still 4-bet the bluffs. They still call the same hands. That's all, right? Like they don't have more folding frequency. Just those 3-4 hands are pure 4-betting, and the rest is locked. And I want you guys to start thinking about why, right? Give your answer and start thinking about why that might be the case. Because what's important is to know the reason why, right? If you just make the pre-flop play and you don't know why you're making it, you're likely to, again, have it fizzle away later and not be able to land the plane. And the answer is we 3-bet more, okay? We 3-bet more. Now, I'm not gonna give you the reason yet, so I want you to start thinking about it. Why we are 3-betting more against someone who's 4-betting queens plus ace king suited. Right? You would say, I mean, I'm just getting 4-bet a lot, right? Like if they are 4-betting pure with those hands, we're just getting 4-bet too much, right? So why would we want to 3-bet? So we're gonna explore that idea. So here we are. We have a pre-flop sim run with a new multi-way solver thing, and we're gonna lock the RFI, so nothing there changes. And we're gonna start with imposition with hijack first. I wanna test a few of these assumptions in position, and then we're gonna go to the big blind, and we're gonna talk about the differences between in position and out of position, the differences between having many players behind and having no players behind, right? All of those things are gonna affect these decisions. So UTG defense, we're just gonna take it, lock it, and we're gonna start actually with something different. So we're gonna take this defense and we're gonna make this guy call too much. Make him call queen jack suited. We're gonna make him call these hands, right? And we're gonna see what happens, right? Start thinking about what you think is gonna happen. Things are mostly the same, except we're getting called a ton more, right? So start thinking about what you think might happen, okay? So we have to wait a little bit for the node lock to be applied. And we see an 8.1. We can actually compare nodes and look at the previous strategy. And we see that, wait, this was with a different node lock that I tried before. Original was 8.3%, and now it's 8.1%, right? It just barely changes at all. We've made the opposition call a ton more, and imposition doesn't really care so much, right? Why would that be? Well, let's do a little bit more of testing, and then I'll explain why this is happening. So we're going to do the same with this guy. We're going to make him 4-bet more frequently. So we're going to make him never call with queens, and we're going to make him maybe 4-bet, maybe like this with jacks. So more 4-betting with volley. Lock it. Let's see what happens. And I mean, we're 3-betting ever so slightly less, but as you can see, this overall defense is much more sticky, right? Originally it was folding 58, 59%. Now it's folding 50. And it was 4-betting like 18%, 19, and now it's 4-betting 21-ish%. So overall, we're facing a much harsher defense. We barely care in position, right? Why is this? Well, it's because as long as you get to play post-flop in position against a weak range, you're fine. Right? Your opponent putting himself in a situation where he's just out of position with a weak range a lot on flop is not particularly good for him. Right? It's still not great for us because we are facing a very sticky defense. Right? It's not like he's overfolding, but we seem to not really care so much that he is applying these measures. So you see, we could say that this is how some players would try to apply some countermeasures, right? They would start getting stickier, 4-betting more with jack, whatever. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't quite work. On the other hand, if we do the opposite, right? If we make this guy overfold, that is going to affect our 3-bet, right? Because now we are making money on this street right now, right? We're making money on this street right now. So it went from 8 up to 10. Now, even though it went from 8 to 10, you might even say like, I mean, this this is a ridiculous amount of folds, right? This is a lot of folds, right? Only going up by like 1.6% or something seems like not that much. Right? It went up, but we're just using like ace jack off. We're not going insane. Right? And this guy is overfolding massively. Well, the reason is because you're still facing 5 opponents, right? You're still facing 5 opponents. Basically, as long as the other 4 opponents are aggressive and good, you're still going to face a lot of cold 4-bets, is basically what this strategy is getting at, right? If your 5 opponents were weak and passive, then this wouldn't look like this, right? I'm not going to do it right now, but if we were to lock every single player behind to call 4-bet less, to all these things, then the 3-bet could go insanely wider, right? But because it's assuming the other players are quite aggressive and good, it's just going very, very subtle with the exploit, just 1 pip. Right? So now we're going to look at what happens when we are the big blind, right? Because when we're the big blind, something changes. Well, first of all, we're out of position, but also we're the last player to act, right? So we're going to start with, let's start with the overfold, right? Let's just start with the overfold and see what happens. So we have this defense and we're going to make a significant overfold like what the other guy was doing, okay? And now we are 3-betting 43% of the time, just 43% of the time. See, when there's no multiple players to keep us in check, we just go crazy. If we're just facing one opponent and they play really, really bad, we go very, very extreme with our exploits, especially from the big blind. I mean, think about it. Most hands from the big blind are kind of indifferent from calling and 3-betting. Like, it's pretty close to indifferent. So surely if they have a really bad leak, they go from indifferent to 3-bet, right? It makes sense. If they were very close to indifferent already, surely it would be very easy to make them a pure 3-bet. And that's kind of what's happening here. This defense is just leading to a very extreme exploit. But what we saw before is that the overcalling in position, we don't care. What do you think will happen here? Will we care? Well, I've already let you with my tone, so you probably know that it will matter, right? Just because of how I said it. But yes, it will matter. Out of position, it will matter. Out of position, we actually really hate it. Originally, we were 3-betting 5 point something percent, and we're doing 4.3. Okay, it's just not as good to be out of position in a 3-up. I mean, a 3-up pot is still relatively high enough SPR. It's not like that shallow SPR. Right? So we don't want to play relatively still high SPR out of position. Even though their range is weaker, we just don't want that situation. Right? So this is a key difference between in position and out of position. In position, as long as he gets to play in position against the weak range, he's fine, right? Out of position, we actually would rather not get called. So now let's finally try the original exploit that I talked about. Maybe instead of 28, I think it's more realistic to face maybe like a 25 big blind. Try that. And we're going to lock pure 4-bets with aces, kings, queens, and ace king suited. And the rest is the same. No more folds, no less 4-bet bluffs, no nothing, just those hands. And we actually 3-bet more. We actually 3-bet more. Now, we don't 3-bet significantly more. I mean, at the end of the day, the lead that we have caused is not very extreme, right? We just made them take hands that are decently reasonable 4-bets for value, that are good hands, and they're forwarding more. That wouldn't cause a craziness amount of 3-bets, right? But it's going up by 1.3, 1.4%, which for a 5% 3-bet, it's quite a lot, right? It's like 20 to 25% more 3-bets. So it's what I want you to focus on is the direction of the change, right? It went up. And some of you guys, I think, nailed the idea. Morcifio said, when they call, UTG will be capped because he doesn't have queens plus ace king on so many flops. So knowing that, we want to 3-bet more and fold more versus 4-bet. Yes, that is basically exactly right. Right? Mateo said, allowing to make a mistake. Yeah, of course, it's allowing to make a mistake. But if you don't know what the mistake entails and how to take advantage of it, the mistake is not going to lose for them. Right? In order for a mistake to lose, you need to actually capitalize on it. Right? If you just know that they make a mistake, but you don't know what to do about it, then it doesn't matter. It's not really a mistake. Mistake is that on so many flops, queens plus are very strong, and they don't have those hands. And on certain other flops, ace king suited is pretty strong, and they're not going to have those hands. So that's really and then you have to put that together and figure out how to exploit it, right? We're going to look later at how to exploit that. But for now, yeah, that's the idea. Is in position and out of position is different, and the amount of players that we have behind also matters a lot. Okay, so conclusions. Facing many opponents dilutes exploits. Again, the disclaimer is if all of your opponents have the same league, then it doesn't matter, right? If all of your opponents 4-bet too little, then it doesn't matter if there's 5, 10, or 20, right? You're just printing by 3-betting. In position, we don't mind anything that's not a balanced over 4-bet, right? Unless we're getting over 4-bet in a balanced way, we don't really care so much. Out of position, we hate getting called, right? So we saw that in position, I don't mind so much. Out of position, we actually don't like getting called too much. Actively dislike it. Getting 4-bet by value sets up bigger exploits post-flop, right? So when you are holding that 7-6 suited, and you think the guy is over 4-betting with those queens plus ace-king suited, right? And you're holding 7-6 suited, you might say, I mean, why would I 3-bet this if I'm just going to get 4-bet more? I want to see a flop with my 7-6 suited. Yeah, you want to see a flop, but wouldn't it be nicer if when you see a flop with 7-6 suited, they just don't have queens plus? Wouldn't that be nicer? Even though you see the flop less often, what if whenever you see the flop, they just never have those hands? That would be pretty nice, as long as you know how to play 7-6 suited versus a range with no queens plus, right? You would have to play accordingly. But if you do, it would be very, very nice to be in that situation. Pre-flop is post-flop. Okay? A single node exploit will fizzle away if not followed through properly. This is why when you node lock, whether it's the flop where you node lock the flop, whether you node lock pre-flop, no matter where you node lock, as long as it's not the last node of the game tree, if you mess up what happens later, whatever you think you're doing is just going to fizzle away. And late street exploits are incomplete without early street exploit. What I said before about the fold to c-bet, if someone is folding to c-bet and you're not opening wider, you cannot exploit that person, right? You just cannot. They are going to be losing because they're playing bad, but you're not going to make disproportionately more money because you cannot create air out of thin air, right? Once you reach the flop, you have the air that you have. You can't overbluff more than whatever your range is. If you find yourself looking at your opponent's tendencies facing a river action, you already messed up the hand. Okay, if you find yourself on the river facing a bet and being like, oh, I think this guy is an underbluffer, I guess I'll fold this gotcha. If that's where the idea came, if you got to the river and then that idea came, you already messed up the whole hand, right? Because how you play against the player that underbluffs river is something that affects how you play pre-flop, right? So it's an idea that you shouldn't come up with it on the river. Of course, folding is good versus that player, but it's an idea that you should have already had from the start of the hand. It's like you're pre-flop, oh, this guy underbluffs river. You're on the flop, oh, this guy underbluffs river. You're on the turn, this guy underbluffs river. Everything that happens along the entire game tree hinges on him underbluffing the river. Okay, it's both ways. Post-flop exploits are pre-flop exploits, and pre-flop exploits are post-flop exploits. If you come up with an exploit late in the hand, I mean, it's fine, right? That's good, but you should have come up with it throughout the entire game tree. So now we're gonna go and look at that specific board, and we're gonna try to see basically the effect that I'm talking about here. So let's solve both scenarios. Okay, let's take this and unlock it. Let's look at how GTO looks like whenever we do get called. Right, so we get called, we solve it, and we're just gonna give it I'm gonna pick a on purpose board where what we talked about matters a lot, right? Jack 7 deuce, the fact that they don't have any overpair, it matters a lot. Here they do have overpairs, right? C-bet frequency, 51%. Okay, makes sense, right? It's just a board that we want to play polar because it's quite wet. We have overpairs, and we want to bet big and deny equity with them, right? So it just plays a polar mixed strategy. C-bet the flop. We're gonna try to look at the very dry board. So maybe a deuce turn, right? Very dry board. We c-bet the turn 47% of the time, just 50-50. Some traps, some bluffing, and then on river, on the 3, we are shoving 63% of the time. We're shoving ace jack, and then king jack, queen jack, I suspect are almost merges rather than like pure value. Yeah, they get to fold chops and some better with, in the case of queen jack, it folds out a little bit of king jack. So king jack, queen jack, kind of a chop foley hand. Pure value starts at ace jack, right? Ace jack plus. Makes sense. I mean, I think this would be pretty intuitive for most people. Right? Most people would be like, hey, surely ace jack is value. King jack, I'm not sure. Right? So pretty intuitive. And then, some bluffs in there with whichever the best blockers are, right? Okay, now let's go back to this pre-flop and let's lock what we just said. So these four hands, pure and UTG calls. Jack, 7, deuce. What do you think is going to happen? Make a prediction in your head. What do you think we're going to see? Just a range bet for 2/3. Okay, so our betting volume on flop has multiplied by 2, right? You need to understand the way a solver makes its math is by connecting a lot of nodes across the game tree, a lot of equities, a lot of equity realizations. In the case of this AI solver, it doesn't see all the strategies and all the nodes, but it sees the equities and equity realizations, right? But it's seen further down the game, right? So when it's 3-betting more, it already knows that it's going to c-bet more on flop. If you don't follow through with the c-bet on flop, are you really exploiting pre-flop? Right? This applies to any pre-flop exploit. If you don't do the right thing on flop, are you really following through correctly? Are you really gaining the EV? Right? If you're just taking one of the snapshots of that whole strategy, right? Like the solver strategy is changing across the entire game tree, and you're just taking one snapshot and applying it to that node, do you think you're actually gaining the EV? Range bet, right? Betting volume multiplied by 2. Let's see what happens. Turn deuce, and we see a higher barrel frequency, right? Even though we range bet, even though we have a higher 3-bet, we're still barreling the turn a decent amount more, right? There's very little slow playing, for example. Right? We're just fast playing much more, right? Very interesting. Right? So overall, we're taking this line like 4 times more often, right? Because we're 3-betting more, we're range betting instead of betting it half the time. And then on the turn, we're also betting more. We're taking this line 3-4 times more often. We get called, and let's see what and actually the sizing is bigger here, right? The sizing the solver is choosing here on the turn is bigger. So let's actually pick the same sizing to be more apples to apples. So it's even more betting volume than what we were saying. It's going to be whatever geo is. I don't know, say it's 48% or something, whatever geometric is, call. And on the river, we are jamming king jack comfortably, queen jack comfortably, jack 10 comfortably, jack 9 comfortably. Jack 8 is starting to be, let's see if it's even close when it comes to calling frequency. No, it's just pure value. Like, it's not pure value betting, but when it does, it's not a merge like it was before with queen jack, right? It's just value. Right? Jack 8, and so is jack 6, right? We see that jack 6 of hearts, if it got here, it would pure jam river, and it's purely for value. So the threshold has gone from ace jack to jack 6, right? Now the merge bets is 10s, right? The hand that used to be king jack, queen jack, now is 10s, just jamming for that merge effect. At 7 is kind of that, a little bit, right? At 7 is kind of that in this case. So vastly different strategy. So again, I asked you, if you 3-bet more, or this is just one example of what they could be doing wrong pre-flop. But if you do the right no luck pre-flop and you change your strategy pre-flop, and then you don't understand what's happening later and you don't follow through, do you think you're actually gaining the EV, right? Or is it fizzling? It doesn't mean you're losing the EV either, but it probably means if you don't follow through properly, it just fizzles away somewhere, right? Because if you 3-bet more, for example, but then you don't attack post-flop, then you don't actually gain the extra EV with all of those extra bluffs and all of that extra thin value, right? You don't actually gain the EV if you don't follow through. That's kind of what I'm telling you. And okay, so if this is true, right? And keep in mind, the solver is really, really good at basically getting back on its feet, right? You kick the solver down and it gets back. Kick it down, gets back, right? You force him to make a mistake pre-flop, it fixes it on the flop. You force a mistake on the flop, it fixes it on the turn, right? You kick it down, it keeps getting back up. A human is not like that. A human, if you kick him down pre-flop, they're just probably going to play really bad on flop, right? When our opponent is defending poorly pre-flop, they are not going to adjust their ranges on flop to mix some calls with king, queen, no backdoor, because they don't have overpairs now, right? They don't know to do those things like a solver. So on flop, you're probably actually going to get many more folds than 43%. Right? On turn, you're probably going to get many more folds than 27%. And on river, let's actually look at what the strategy is on both boards. So here, yeah, ace king is calling a decent amount, and then second pair, under pair. But we saw that, for example, top pair was mixing folds already in the other sim. So king jack, queen jack was 0 EV. Here, it's a 40 blind call for him, 25 blind call. That's going to change. So let's look at the threshold for the other sim. Yeah, and it actually looks kind of similar, but as you can see, he needs to call way less with ace king. He needs to call less frequency with second pair, less frequency with under pairs. He needs to start folding top pairs. Queens is indifferent, okay? So basically what I'm suggesting is when a human makes a mistake, they don't get back on their feet, right? If their range doesn't contain queens, they don't remember it later, right? A solver is like, oh, I did 4-bet queens, now I need to make up for it, right? That's how a solver thinks, but a human doesn't think like that. So I'm not gonna tell you what to do with that information, but that's something you need to use to your advantage. When hands are missing from your opponent's ranges, they're just missing forever, right? They're gone. They're not going to be able to get back on their feet and make they're just gone, right? Those hands are gone, they're gone. Okay, so now we are going to talk about common leaks at low stakes to finish it up. And I'm going to give you ideas for how to exploit it in a slightly more sophisticated way. But a lot of these leaks probably you know already, but you probably don't know them well enough. Otherwise, they wouldn't be common leaks at low stakes, right? If everyone in this call knew what I'm going to talk about, it probably would not be common at low stakes. So positional unawareness, right? Basically having like rigid charts in their mind that they don't change enough, whether they're button, small blind, UTG. Passivity. This is especially when it comes to polar ranges pre-flop, right? You probably have encountered this where, someone is able to 3-bet ace jack off button versus cutoff, right? But whenever they have to 3-bet, as we saw, like 5-4 suited versus hijack from the big blind, or ace 3 suited, or ace 10 off at some frequency, or those things, or also when it comes to 4-betting, right? They start not being that common. And then what I call Spider-Man pointing fingers. Have you ever seen that meme where it's a Spider-Man cartoon and there's like multiple Spider-Mans all pointing at each other, right? That's low stakes. It's everyone saying like, no one 4-bets enough bluffs. And then you look at, they are not 4-betting enough bluffs. They are also overfolding to 4-bets. It's like, why is everyone overfolding to 4-bets? No one is 4-betting bluffs, but everyone is saying that no one else is 4-betting bluffs, right? Everyone's Spider-Man pointing fingers at each other. So a lot of players end up overfolding versus under bluff lines at those pools, and just no one is pressing the button that wins. So let's first talk about some examples of each. So as for positional unawareness, the most common ones that come to mind is going to be playing really bad on the big blind versus different position opens, right? When UTG opens, the big blind might call too much at lower stakes, but when the button opens or the small blind opens, the big blind folds too much, or doesn't 3-bet enough. That is positional unawareness, right? Another one is the 4-bet range itself, like what the value 4-bet is, like what we looked at just before, right? The thing that we looked at with queens plus and ace king 4-betting from earlier streets, from earlier positions. This is something that at low stakes people are not as well adjusted to, right? They treat 4-bet ranges. They do adjust a little bit, but not maybe enough. And in general, passivity with those polar ranges. Right? So we're gonna check some of those out. So let's check a few of those dynamics here pre-flop. Let's say it's button versus small blind. So button, small blind, pretty reasonably played by population so far. I think the open and the 3-bet at lower stakes even. I don't think people would play much different than this. But a very common thing is basically, let's actually remove the all-in. This is a bit unrealistic. And what's common is to be here on the small blind and be like, no one 4-bets enough with bluffs. And you see 36% folds. It's actually not a lot of folds, right? At low stakes, you can see people folding here like 50%. Something. I mean, this is not rocket science, what I'm going to do now, right? Like the complex exploits, we've already looked at them before. But this is more of a easier idea, right? It's not rocket science. So now when we get 3-bet, we are 4-betting twice as much, right? 18, 19% of the time. Right? So if you are complaining that people are not 4-betting enough, that this and that, are you the guy that's pressing the button? Are you the guy that's the only non-Spider-Man pointing fingers at each other? Or are you still just doing the same as everyone else? Now, again, what happens if you do this and then you range bet the flop against a range that's too tight, that they folded too much pre-flop? Think about it, right? You gained EV pre-flop by 4-betting too much, then you got to the flop, they have a very strong range, and then you range c-bet into them, right? The EV that you gained, you just lost. I don't know if it's the same amount of EV that you lost as you gain, right? It's hard to know. Is it more? Is it less? I don't know. But a lot of the efficiency of your exploit just fizzled away. You're basically passing money around at that point, right? And then you say, okay, but I know that people are under 4-betting, under check raising the flop. I know we're folding the flop. Okay, fine. Then you range bet the flop because you think there's a new exploit there, right? You 4-bet more, then you get to the flop. You range bet the flop because you think there's a new leak. Do you just play the turn on the river normally now, right? Like basically these things, you need to take them to their final conclusion. You need to take them to the whole, like the whole line is what exploits your opponent, not the node itself, okay? So this is one example of those things. Another thing that we might look at is when people under 3-bet, right? So yeah, I mean, of course, here, let's say this guy is, let's actually take small blind. Let's actually take small blind open, or actually take small blind open and say, what happens when this guy's not 3-betting enough, right? And that's, you know, some people are good at knowing what's going to happen, right? Of course, you're going to overfold. Right? There's not enough bluff. Okay, not enough bluff. Okay, fair. There's not enough bluff. So you're right. And are you opening more? Some of you are, but you see, it's the whole line. Once you face it, basically the worst exploit is facing the 3-bet and being like, oh, I think people 3-bet too infrequently here, right? That's the worst kind of exploit. And then you overfold. Sure, overfolding is good at that point, but you need to know what's going to happen beforehand, right? And then in a 3-bet pot, maybe it also matters, right? This range that I created is a bit arbitrary, of course, but it's going to have to play very different post-flop, right? They're going to have different value thresholds. They're going to have different bluffs, right? They're going to have to bluff different things. They're going to have to bluff more post-flop, right? Because they have less here. So you have to stay, basically not lose the thread, right? Don't lose the thread. What is the opposite, right? Let's say we face too frequent of a 3-bet. So you're going to let it recover there, and let's take this 27. We're going to lock the folds, and we're just going to go 25. Of course, we're going to respond very aggressively to that, of course. Like, we're not going to fold, a 4-bet, a 4-bet jam, right? Of course. But are you doing this, right? If you face the 3-bet and then you realize, oh, this is a very weak 3-bet, then you already messed up, right? Before the 3-bet even happens, your exploit is already being deployed. But not only that, the same thing happens for post-flop. What do you think happens if this range, c-bet's range now on a certain board, or triple barrels with 2 or 3 times more bluff candidates, right? It's the whole line. If you mess up later, your whole idea ends up mostly fizzling away. That is why you have at lower stakes a lot of players who kind of understand how to exploit in a very basic way. Like, oh, if this guy doesn't bluff, I fold. If this guy folds too much, I bluff. People understand those things, and yet win rates are very small, right? Why is that? Because everyone's exploits are just fizzling away all the time, right? They're just doing one thing and then not following through. So that's why you see win rates not really being that high at lower stakes. Because you could, theoretically, you could probably win at like double digit, right? And you don't see many people doing that, right? And it's because it's just people don't know how to exploit. They think they know how to exploit, but they just don't. It's all fizzling away all the time. So let's summarize. Don't autopilot pre-flop. It's the most important street. Okay, you have the most data on your opponents. Your exploits need to be set up from the beginning, at least for the biggest effect, right? The most important street. In position and out of position work fundamentally different in terms of incentives, mainly with the getting called idea, right? Getting called in position, don't care. Getting called out of position, it almost doesn't matter by what you're getting called, you really don't like it. Bad exploits are single node. Good exploits are a long sequence of moves. Don't lose the thread. And then don't be Spider-Man pointing fingers. Break the pattern. Right? if everyone is overfolding the 4-bets and everyone knows that everyone else is under bluffing the 4-bets, don't be everyone else. Don't wait until that node comes up, right? If everyone under bluffs from the big blind 3-bet and everyone overfolds to a big blind 3-bet because everyone under bluffs, well, just don't be the guy that under bluffs from the big blind 3-bet, right? Don't complain about or don't wait until that specific node comes up. Like, oh, I faced the 3-bet, now it's the time. Or this happened, now it's the time. No, it's your whole game has to adjust to those things. So if you got a question, make sure to ask here or on Discord or leave a comment. And yeah, thanks for attending and see you in the next one.